Third objective today is to examine sources of performance information. So during our performance management process, we spoke about we talked about measuring performance throughout the year, having a performance review at the end of the cycle or the year. How do we go about where do we get information from to actually determine how employees are performing? Well, there are various sources of performance information, and we use the 360-degree feedback example to illustrate various sources here. For instance, superiors, peers, subordinates, self, customer, and so on. So what about the sources? Should we use one source? Should we use all sources? Well, each source seems to have their own benefits and drawbacks and may be relevant or not depending upon the type of industry. Generally, managers or immediate supervisors tend to be the most popular approach to evaluating employees. And of course, managers, one of the main advantages or the major benefit to using managers to evaluate employees is that they tend to be the least biased source of information because their success depends upon the employee's productivity. However, there are a number of drawbacks to having managers the most popular approach to evaluate employees. One drawback is that sometimes managers lack information, enough information or appropriate information to provide informed feedback on employee performance. Why? Sometimes managers are unable to sufficiently observe employees' day-to-day work in order to validly assess their performance. Take, for example, many managers who have a large span of control or perhaps will be so busy conducting more administrative work. It can be very difficult to actually observe what each employee is doing on a day-to-day basis and then be able to evaluate that. Sometimes managers also lack knowledge about the technical dimensions of a subordinate's work. Finally, of course, managers, like everyone else, are, of course, open to perceptual errors, and they can create certain perceptual errors which can lead to bias or perhaps a lack of objectivity in evaluations. So these are different problems with using managers. They still remain our superiors, as highlighted in the picture here, but they still remain the most popular approach because, of course, as I said, the research shows us that they provide least biased information in evaluating employees. What about some of these other parties here that are not as popular? For instance, peers. Peers can be a valid assessment of performance, especially when managers can't observe everything that an employee does. This is particularly so for teamwork settings, where peers can evaluate fellow team members. Of course, as you could have probably guessed, what do you think would be the major drawback to using peers? To just think about it, is of course friendships can lead to peers skewing their evaluation of their friends, and rivalries even between peers can lead to subjectivity when evaluating each other. Subordinates. We see subordinate next. Subordinates can be used as well, but one of the drawbacks to having subordinates evaluate their superior, in this case, the employee might be their superior, is that subordinates can fear retaliation from the person who they are evaluating, especially if it's not anonymous. So the key lesson if using subordinates to evaluate an employee and using that employee's subordinates is to keep the performance evaluation anonymous, and ensure that at least 3 subordinates are used. Self-ratings. So yes, of course, having an individual rate themselves can be an important source of information when evaluating performance. Who else can observe what the individual employee does every day on a day-to-day basis best, other than the individual employee themselves? So while this is rarely used alone, it can provide a useful source of what the employee does on a day-to-day basis. And the reason it is rarely used alone, of course, as you would have probably guessed, is that the individual person can be biased towards their own performance and skew their performance towards the positive side to bring them to show themselves in a positive light, sort of a self-serving bias. Finally, customers can be useful and are typically the best source of performance information in the service sector in particular. However, one of the drawbacks traditionally with having customers involved in performance measurements is that use of customers can be can be expensive, particularly when traditional surveys were used. However, with the use of online surveys and having customers complete online surveys, costs, of course, are tremendously lower than before. So I just wanted to briefly cover some of these sources of performance information, and that now takes us to our fourth objective, which will be the perceptual biases we just mentioned before.